Hi, everybody. This next discussion is about Gabriel Garcia Marquez and magical realism. Marquez actually boy, he's quite an important figure in my particular life. I enjoy teaching his work and teach him early and often. Um, Death Constant Beyond Love is not the one that I normally teach. I usually go with Innocent Arandira and her heartless grandmother, sometimes called The Incredibly Tragic Story of Innocent Arandira and Her Cruel and Heartless Grandmother. Um, and if you ever get a chance, there's a movie made called Innocent Arandira, and it's really fabulous, and it has a lot of magical realism in it. If you want to learn more about magical realism, look that one up. So Gabriel Garcia Marquez is really, gosh, when I read him, sometimes an author is meat and potatoes. It's just really this is the meat of the writing. And I think of like Mahfouz or Beckett as being meat and potatoes. And for me, other writers, they're the liver of what we have to read. It's just, it's good for you, but you don't really want to read it. You know, but for me, Gabriel Garcia Marquez and many, many other ones, but especially Marquez, he's like, but he's the chocolate cake of writers. I wish that I had had some time to spend talking to him because I think that what he writes is amazing. But before I gush about him, let's talk a little bit about magical realism. Magical realism is much more like a mundane story, and in that story, nothing terrific really happens. But there's this whole other world wrapped up in it. And in that world, it's like you're on LSD. The regular rules of the world do not apply. Um, so, in a story like with magical realism in it, you can have a butterfly made from paper that hits a wall and becomes stuck to it. This is embedded in the glass now. And all of the characters take this as being normal. So magic is part of their world. They don't consider it to be magic. Also, don't consider this to be the same world that the rest of us live in. Marquez also tends to write with settings that are sparse and often quite desolate and dismal. If he writes of a sea, he'll write of all of the dead people floating underneath of it. If he writes of a desert, it isn't about a desert flower. It's about the windy desert and how it makes people forget. If you die by the sea, you'll go to heaven, but if you die in the desert, you don't. So stuff like that. Um, and he uses that as a backdrop. He also tends to write women in two different ways. Young women are always, not always, but young women tend to be used as tokens and ways to power. They're used um, as a means to power. They're used as chattel. They're used as sexual objects. Innocent Arandira features Arandira, who is prostituted by her grandmother. And in this one, of course, we know that Nilsen Farina is using his daughter to get power from the senator, to access that power. The other way that women are usually viewed is if they're past that sexualized or childbearing age. If they're older, then a lot of times they are seen as maybe a force to be reckoned with, sometimes to be connected to. Although connection is a real problem in Marquez's work. So in Innocent Arandira, the grandmother, who is, older and aged, is taken seriously by people. But she is also part of a system of oppression. And in Death Constant Beyond Love, the woman that was sort of a force to be reckoned with, of course, is murdered. We find that she has been, her husband, Nelson Farina, has drawn and quartered her and then used her as fertilizer in her own um, cauliflower patch, which I think is, oh my God. Anyway, so and then the mother is of the daughter of Laura is seen as a beautiful woman, but who's dead. So yeah, crazy. So one of the big themes that I think runs through Marquez's work is this idea of annihilation, this idea of being alone, and of being in utter ruin. So let's talk a little bit more about magical realism. It seems to, as a genre, it blends fantasy, myth, and often paranormal with reality and actuality. There's another story by Marquez in, I think it's in 100 Years of Solitude. It's called uh, The Third, oh shoot, The Third Resignation. And it's all about a boy who dies at the age of 7, and then he grows up and stops growing at 25. His dad's a giant, so he's half giant and he has a blue beard. And then he realizes that he's actually decomposing, and so he resigns himself the third time for actually death. So it's like, you see a lot of things with alienation and these comments by Marquez. In Death Constant Beyond Love, you'll find a whole lot of political commentary as well. But in magical realism, the regular laws of physics just generally don't apply. So the laws of physics, the facts associated with historical events, and our understanding of the observable universe are challenged. There are twists and invasions into the real world, and it kinds of creates an extraordinary but plausible situation. Usually it's defined in the current sense from 1955 as a form of uncanny realism, and it originated in Latin America, of course, from Marquez. Characteristics of the genre include plenitude, which is embellishment or the use of the fanciful, hybridity, which is blending time periods or constellatory realities, metafiction, where the reader and the text directly enter each other's worlds, and an unreliable narrator. So the narrator withholds or does not justify events or characters' viewpoints. So in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's story, Death Constant Beyond Love, word substitutes mark plenitude. And remember, plenitude is embellishment or the use of the fanciful. So he uses these word switches, right? Or word substitutes. Sweat is called soup. The only real rose present in the city that is named Rosal de Biere, which is rosebush of the viceroy. And it's not even from there. It's been dragged across the desert. And it's brought in and worn by a foreigner, Senator Sanchez. A foreigner is a Griego. And the quote-unquote fixed term refers to death rather than the senatorial term. That's on page 988. Note the implausibility of the scene where Senator Sanchez fashions that paper butterfly, because it just flies out of the room and it folds and it becomes permanently plastered to the wall. And he's also got these big buckets of money, and he's got this fan, and they're flying around the room. So you have a whole lot of the that fanciful sort of stuff going on. I'm not really sure what else I could say. Well, let's talk about politics a little, because I think that most of our authors are influenced by politics, much like Mahfouz. Gabriel Garcia Marquez really initially worked as a journalist, and he was influenced by his grandfather's political views. His grandfather had protested the banana massacres that took place in 1927. And that's when the United Fruit Company demanded better working conditions, and the Colombian Army opened fire on the strikers and their families. And it was just after Sunday Mass. And its leader was arguing that it had attacked to prevent the foreign United States from invading to protect its own interests. So they murdered a group of people. They massacred them in the name of protecting them from the U.S. Smells like BS to me. And it had been a liberal veteran of his grandfather had been a liberal veteran of the Thousand Days War, which was based not only on falling coffee prices, but also on liberals' contention that conservatives, then in the rule, were using fraudulent methods to win elections. The United States also threatened involvement in this war because of its interest in the Panama Canal. So Marquez commented in interviews that his grandfather's tales of the Civil War and its horrors shaped his storytelling process as a socialist and anti-imperialist. Marquez also became a member of the Barranquilla group. Barranquilla is Barranquilla. That was a collective of writers and philosophers in Colombia. And they were first fictionalized as the Four Friends in 100 Years of Solitude. So in Death Constant Beyond Love, Marquez treats political corruption, which is, going through the motions and illusions necessary to achieve re-election, and the character's denial of his impending death by engaging in his love affair and going through the motions of re-election in order to avoid the preparation and the acceptance of dying. This kind of is reiterated in another work called Love in the Time of Cholera, if you want to look that up. And I think of the machinations that the senator goes through with the big paper backdrop, and he's kind of extending his speech and doing this rah rote thing that he's memorized. And at the back, and they turn around and see, this is my vision for the future. And I think everybody knows, though, that this is kind of not going to happen. But that could be a point of contention for you. One thing that you might enjoy is Peter Stone did an interview with Marquez in the Paris Review. And I can put up that link for you. In fact, I think that I will. So here's some ideas for writing. The first one, and I just have three of them actually, and they all kind of relate to what we've just talked about. The first one is to define plenitude and hybridity. And remember, we talked about that. Plenitude would be the embellishment or use of the fanciful, and hybridity would be blending time periods or constellatory realities. And discuss their role in this story. All right. Suggestion number 2 is to discuss that theme of alienation in the story, paying particular attention to the senator and Nelson Farina. So Nelson Farina is in exile. He can't go anywhere because he's murdered his wife, and the senator won't fix it so that he can get out of there. And the senator himself ends up dying alone. He alienates himself from his wife and 5 children. He never actually gets to have sex with Laura Farina, and he dies ultimately alone. And I think that is a very interesting topic to explore. And then my third suggestion is to think about the dichotomy between nature and artifice in the story. And include a discussion of that unreliable narrator. All right. So let me know how that goes. Good luck. I'm trying to get this up early so that you can have plenty of time to think about it. And good luck. Thanks.